Well, if you would open your Bibles, Isaiah chapter 49, Isaiah chapter 49. And I'm reading from the Message version of Scripture, beginning with the 14th verse, the 14th and 15th verse of Isaiah chapter 49. And there you will notice these words, "But Zion said, I don't get it. God has left me. My master has forgotten that I even exist. Can a mother forget the infant at her breast, walk away from her baby she bore? But even if mothers forget, I'd never forget you, never. Look, I've written your names on the backs of my hands." This is part two of Is Anybody There? Is anybody there? There are various experiences that you can go through in your life that can leave you feeling so isolated, separated from the rest of the world. You can go through some weird experiences, unusual experiences that make it where you don't think that other people can identify with where you are. Pain has a way of isolating you. Misfortune has a way of isolating you because whenever you're experiencing pain, you see other people around you that are well. And whenever you have misfortune, you see everybody else who's like getting blessed. And then when you're alone, it looks like you see all of the couples together. And so one thing after another reinforces and we start feeling peculiar and that I'm in this situation all by myself. And Zion, the people of God, were feeling this way, that they were saying, God, you've left me. You know, and they were asking, you know, I mean, does a mother leave her child and pull them away from the breast? And God says, you don't get it. I never forget you. You're always on my mind. You're really the apple of my eye. He said, I've written your names on the backs of my hands. I've got you on my mind. I've got reminders around me all the time that let me know. In fact, you know, because the present day ministry of Jesus Christ is sitting at the right hand of the Father, He ever lives to make intercession for the saints. How can you not be on God's mind when the present ministry of Jesus Christ is to intercede on our behalf? He's not interceding on the behalf of people in the world. He is interceding on behalf of the saints of God. So you ought to know when you got Jesus praying for you. And He's our elder brother. This is the Son of God, the Messiah. I mean, you ought to just feel that like you really got some extra power. I mean, there's one thing, you know, to get your Sunday school teacher to pray for you and your pastor, your mama, your daddy, your grandmama and all of that. But when Jesus, the one who has connection with the Father, the one who is our mediator between God and man, and when you've got a praying mediator who's on the right hand of God, interceding for the saints. And so there are a wide variety of things that just get to people and make them feel isolated. But here the people of God felt isolated as though God had forsaken them. Whenever you go through trouble and you start asking God, God help me, and why am I having such a hard time? It feels like you have been God forsaken. If you prayed for healing and you're still in pain. If you pray for deliverance and you're still bound by something. You know, you wonder, God, what's up? You know, have you walked out? Have you left me? Where are you? Isn't it amazing that sometimes when we call ourselves praying and we give God this list of things that we want Him to do, as though He's Santa? And we get bent out of shape if God doesn't do everything on our list. And here's the way that God responds to us. I'm enough. I'm enough. If He doesn't give us what we want, I mean, God is looking to us and He's saying to us, I am enough. Now here's the way that He says it in the Word. My grace is sufficient to you. My grace is sufficient to you. It is God's way of saying, I am enough. Whatever you're dealing with, I am enough. I'm enough. Sometimes you have to just plant your feet and dig your roots down. and draw strength from the great I am, the one who is the lifter of your head, the one who's the giver of every good and perfect gift. You have to just plant yourself. God says, you know what? I'm not doing this in my own strength. I'm doing this now by the strength of the living God. You know, it ought to be a blessing to you to just realize God is enough. God is enough. He said, my grace is sufficient. It's enough for you. It's enough. He didn't say my grace is insufficient. My grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. He didn't say your strength was sufficient. He said my grace is sufficient. He didn't say the connections and the money that you have is sufficient. He said my grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. You are not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. But sometimes the world can make us feel like we're really lonely people. I mentioned to you one of Mother Teresa's statements. She said one of the greatest diseases is to be nobody to anybody. It's a painful situation where the world seems colder and darker and scarier whenever you're alone, but you are not alone. And you do realize that you can be alone without being lonely, and then you can be lonely when you're not alone. You can be lonely in a crowded room. But I want to share with you just some of the causes of loneliness, because you wonder, why do people come to this place of wondering, you know, God, where are you? Are you there? What are some of the causes of loneliness? What makes us feel alone? Loneliness, it doesn't develop overnight. It can oftentimes be the result of a lifetime of influences and different things that shape our personalities. But here are a few. Loneliness can evolve after a major transition or trauma. You can have a major transition in your life. Divorce is a major transition. Loneliness can ensue after that. It can come from trauma, just trauma in your life, trauma. You can have a sickness, a car accident, and all of a sudden feel totally isolated, totally isolated. And you know, some people tend to be loners because of the circumstances of in their childhood development. And that can be the thing that causes loneliness in their life. Some people tend to be loners just because of circumstances in their childhood development. Circumstances in their childhood development. For example, if you grow up in an unaffectionate home or an overcritical home with an overcritical parent, it tends to make kids shy away from intimacy with other people. If they grew up in a home where there was no affection, or wherever they were always fault finding, it was never good enough, it makes people afraid of intimate relationships, and so it keeps people at bay, because if I let them come too close, they'll start criticizing me, or they won't love me, or they will not be reciprocated in my life. And some people are loners simply because they never learn to communicate well or to get along with their peers. They just don't communicate very well. If you don't communicate well, sometimes it can make you not want to get around other people just because you don't communicate well, because you think that they're going to judge you, because you can't always get your thoughts out, and you may not talk the way that they talk, and so you're afraid that they may make fun of you, of your accent or your grammar. And so if you don't communicate well, it can make some people shy away from getting around other people. Some people deal with loneliness. Some people have overly aggressive or demanding personalities that make people withdraw from them out of intimidation. If your personality is overbearing, and now all of a sudden they've got the kind of personality that drives people away, and then they wonder, why am I by myself? Nobody wants to be around me. And sometimes there's something that's overbearing with their own personality. People with low self-esteem often withdraw from social situations that they believe will lead to rejection. So they will withdraw because they feel like, if I get too close, I'm going to wind up rejected. Because the last time I got in relationship with someone, I got hurt, I was rejected. And so to keep from getting rejected, they just keep their distance and they stay to themselves. You see, loneliness can become a lifestyle for the person who struggles with poorly developed interpersonal skills. It can just become their lifestyle just because of poorly developed interpersonal skills. There are so many social factors that contribute to our loneliness. And see, we live in a day and age now where modern technology has made it easier to do things with other people, without other people, and without even leaving your home. It's just so easy to do things without other people. You know, social media makes it easier to do things without other people and without even leaving your home. You know, you can just shop right online. You don't even have to go to the mall. There's some people that don't like crowds. Some of the worst times of the year to go out, and for some people in the mall, is to go out and be in a crowd of people. Some people can't stand it. It drives them batty. You'd be surprised. But you see, television is one of the major culprits that robs us from relationships with our relatives and friends and neighbors. Just TV and internet can rob people from that. You know, and especially, you think about the fact that for some, especially the elderly, the increased likelihood of just becoming a victim of crime can keep people from venturing out of their homes, particularly at nighttime. You know, you get a certain age and it's like, I don't go out after dark, baby. And you know why? Because in our society now, you know, they become more susceptible to criminal behavior. So it can keep them isolated from people. And see, back in the day, back in the country, you didn't have those issues. You know, in the country, you didn't have to lock your doors. You didn't need a key for your car. I remember my aunt and uncle, they had a car that you could crank the thing up without a key. You can't do that now. People will jack your car even with a key and the door's locked. But you see, we lived in a much more secure society many years ago. And so your grandparents way up, you know, particularly folks that lived in rural communities, in smaller towns, some people, they drive until they can't drive anymore. They go and drive their own car. They don't need anybody to come pick them up. I drive myself. And they take great pride in being able to maintain their independence way over into their 90s. You know, one of my older members in the first church that I pastored was well up in her 90s. She's driving herself, big, humongous car, the size of a yacht. and she drove her yacht. She was 90-something years old, in mid-90s, driving every day, still cooking, cleaning, doing everything, working out in the yard, strong as an ox. She'd shake your hand, nearly break your fingers. So it's a wonderful, wonderful blessing, you know, when you can still have the freedom to do that. And some people, you know, because our society is much more mobile in the past, families relocate several times for career advancements and for other reasons, which tends to discourage people from developing deep friendships. It used to be years ago, you know, you got a job at a company and you worked there for 25 years, retired and got to go watch. Put 30 years in, 35 years, sometimes 40 years at the same company. It doesn't work that way anymore. People are switching careers, and they switch jobs and they move you from one town to another. And so our society is much more transient. And so you used to grow up with a certain set of friends, and you could grow up and be a member of the same church forever, living in the same town forever, working for the same company forever. And now you're born in one city, you go to school in another city, and then you end up living in another city, and you're not even living where the folks that you grew up with are, because our world is much more transient. And sometimes our deep relationships that we had in the earlier years of our life, people that we knew and that we really trusted, you know, you had those relationships, and then you moved to New York City, Chicago, you know, and Philly and Detroit, you know, and you don't know your neighbors, and you don't try to know your neighbors. And it keeps people isolated. But loneliness can really be the result from situational factors or circumstances in life that increase the possibilities of isolation. And so people who are unmarried or divorced or widowed, they're much more likely to encounter loneliness simply because they are more likely to be alone. But loneliness can also occur with to married people. who are in relationships that just don't produce the closeness that they may expect. Or you look at loneliness in a situation where there's a student who has moved away to go to school and they are separated from home. Or a leader who's on the job and, while you were a peer, you were everybody's friends, but now when you become the boss or manager or the supervisor, and now they don't have you in circulation with everybody. Now it's us against you. And now there's a distance, and so that there comes a feeling of isolation. Or the individual who has a disability or a disease. All of these are factors that will increase a person's chances of dealing with loneliness due to a situation that's happening in their life. And so some of these situations of loneliness can actually be brought on by developmental or social or situational factors that lead to problems that really only worsen the loneliness. You think about things like alcoholism, drug abuse, family breakdown, or social ills. They are frequently rooted in loneliness, and they usually lead to greater alienation from meaningful human contact. If a person gets strung out on drugs, first thing they do is pull away from their relationships. People that have problems with alcoholism, they pull away from close relationships because they don't want people to discover their problem. So you pull away from people so they don't discover your sickness. When you've got family members, if they get involved in criminal activity, they pull away from their family. They get in gangs, they pull away from their family. So there's societal things that people can get into. You wonder, how do so many people in our world nowadays wind up by themselves, alone, withdrawn, pulled away from people, and not still connected to the loving relationships, perhaps in the family where they might have grown up, or the neighborhood. But loneliness is a killer, and we don't even have to be by ourselves to experience it. I love something that Mother Teresa said. She said, the hunger for love is much more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread. The hunger for love is much more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread. And way deep down, there's something on the inside of us that just longs to be loved, that longs to be loved, that longs to be loved, that longs to have caring people around you, that longs for that. I was visiting with a gentleman the other day, and he was talking to me about a couple that had been married for 49 years and got a divorce. And I said, my God, why in the world did they get a divorce after 49 years? You know what the man said? He said, she stopped being kind. The older that you get, the more important it is to have kind people around you than smart people. You just need somebody kind, loving. Somebody who's kind, that will talk to you in a kind way, that doesn't tear you down and make you feel like a piece of trash. You need kind people, kind people, kind people. And the kindness in a person's heart, it's another word for mercy. It's kind, loving kindness. It's loving kindness when you're merciful to people. You make a mistake and people just light into you and tear you up for making a mistake. When you've messed up, you need somebody kind in your life. You need kind people. And there are so many people that are isolated because they've been hurt by people that were supposed to love them. And so they withdraw because they're like, I know that I won't hurt me. They might hurt me. I trusted people. I got close to people. I opened my heart the last time and I got hurt really badly. And people will say unkind things and they will do unkind things to you. People who call themselves friends, they're supposed to have your back. You cannot be betrayed by somebody who's not a friend. You can only be betrayed by somebody that you entrust with friendship. If they're not a friend, they can't betray you. It's because if I don't know you, I don't trust you anyway. So you can only be betrayed by somebody who's close enough to have your trust. But remember, loneliness is a feeling. Loneliness is a state of mind. It is an emotion that is brought on by feelings of separation from other human beings. It's a feeling. Loneliness is a feeling of just being separated from other human beings. Loneliness, you feel like you're separated. You don't have to physically be separated, but you feel as though you're separated. You can be at a party all by yourself, and yet there are other people around you, but you feel lonely because it's a feeling of separation from other human beings. You know, well, I'm not like them. And you can isolate yourself and find yourself in loneliness from people. You can feel as though you're the black sheep of the family, even though you have a family, but you feel isolated because you don't feel like you fit in. And everybody else, I'm different from everybody else around me, in my circle, in my clique, in my family. I'm different. They don't accept me. And it creates isolation and loneliness at the end of the day. Does the Lord understand your feelings of loneliness? Absolutely. If you'll notice Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 through 16, I love it that Jesus, we can identify with him. Notice verse 14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest, speaking of Jesus, who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, it says, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. And then notice he says, let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we might obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So Jesus was tempted in every situation that we were. He dealt with loneliness. When did he deal with loneliness? He dealt with loneliness one time when he was in the wilderness by himself for 40 days and 40 nights with nobody but Slewfoot. And he dealt with loneliness, you know, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he asked his own disciples, I mean, the closest one to him, Peter, James, and John, could they tarry with him for an hour? And here, when he was in the greatest crisis moment of his life, and he brought his ace boon coons in, you know, to stay up and pray, and then they fell asleep on him, and he felt all by himself. And then he felt the loneliness when he was on the cross. On the cross, Matthew chapter 27 and verse 46, about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so he's in this position, and so Jesus understands he felt God forsaken. And it was a feeling. It was a feeling that he had been separated from God. Sin separates us from God. Sin separates. That's the terrible thing about sin. It robs us of our intimacy with God. It corrupts our consciousness. Sin destroys intimacy in relationships. And we need to reconnect. We need to be reconciled, to be made friends again, so that once again we realize we are not alone in the world. Remember Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18? And the Lord God says, it is not good that man should be alone, so I will make him a helper comparable to him. It's not good for man to be alone. It's not good. It's the first time that God said something was not good. And it dealt with loneliness. The first time God said, this is not good. There's a lot of other good things in the world, but it's the first time that God ever said something was not good. It's not good that the man should be alone. It is not good. He knew that man needed fellowship. He knew that he needed fellowship. And Les Carter said that loneliness is a feeling of separation, of isolation or distance in human relationships. Loneliness, it implies emotional pain. It implies emotional pain. It implies an empty feeling, and it is a yearning to feel understood and to be accepted by someone. So loneliness is a fairly convoluted and deeply involved emotion. It's a feeling empty. You've got everything, you know. You got the house, but what good is a house to be by yourself? What good is it to have money and you don't have anybody to share it with? What good is it to have food and you don't have anybody to share a meal with, a laugh with, a conversation with? It's punishment. The most severe punishment in our world is called solitary confinement, where they put you in a place and you are devoid of human interaction and contact. And that can really mess with your mind. People lose their mind in solitary confinement. They would rather be beaten beaten, just put on a post and whipped, and then let you go back in circulation with the rest of the population. But to put you in isolation, in solitary confinement, is the worst form of punishment that they can bring to people in our penal institutions. It's the worst. And so if you're struggling with loneliness, you're not alone. Because everybody at different seasons of your life will have isolation for one reason or another. Sometimes, if nothing else, problems that are unique to you can separate you and put you in isolation. You can be in such isolation, you can come to church and because of what you're going through, you can't even talk to other people about it. And you feel that I'm dealing with this and this is something that I'm dealing with. You can be right in that place. Everybody has seasons of loneliness where you go through things and you feel like you're all by yourself. And that I can't even talk to, you find married women say, I can't talk to my husband about this. Married men that says, I can't talk to my wife about this. Sons that says, I can't talk to my father about this. Daughters that say, I can't talk to my mother about this. And they carry things that are a burden in their life because they don't want to mess up other folks. And sometimes they feel like they can't help me anyway. And sometimes they feel like if I give them this information, they're going to use it against me. Who can I trust? Who can I trust? But I love, one of my favorite quotes by Lorraine Hansberry is this, is the thing that makes you exceptional, if you are at all, is inevitably that which must also make you lonely. The thing that will make you exceptional, whatever you're going to really be good at, is ultimately the thing that ends up making you lonely. You find people that are master musicians, they spend an inordinate amount of time with their music. It makes them lonely. But you're not really lonely when you're with something that you love. But it isolates you. The thing that makes a person exceptional, you're going to have to spend exceptional time with it, so it ends up making you lonely in the process. The student who becomes the straight A student has to spend exceptional time studying and reading and researching and writing papers and doing all of that, so they don't have some of the social networks that some of the more popular students have. Because the very thing that would make you to be exceptional also makes you lonely.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.